Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. It's 7 years of making an episode every single week. And part of me just wants to focus on the celebration of that consistency and the amazing connections I've made with fantastic people over the years. But I also want to be honest right now. This really has been one of the hardest weeks, and therefore this has been one of the hardest times to sit down with my microphone. I want to be honest about that. And I've just had moments where I'm wondering, what the heck am I even doing here as a podcast host? So I want to talk about that a little bit today. And I also want to share 2 messages that I got recently that remind me why I'm doing this. Even when we are covering topics here on the podcast that feel beyond what I can even understand or convey in some way, that the topics are huge. We've been covering some really big topics, and I'm grateful that we've had some amazing guests to help us do that. Before I get into things further, in case you are new here, let me introduce myself and the podcast. And I do want to say this would be the weirdest episode to jump into first, but if that's where you're at, welcome. There are other ones that will give you more information or action steps for running your yoga business. Today is more about where we are right now in this moment. What does it feel like to be 7 years of creating a podcast for yoga teachers? So a little bit about me. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her. And this podcast is being recorded on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, who were here on Turtle Island long before my settler ancestors arrived. More than ever, I've found extreme comfort in learning about what I can do for decolonization work, and also learning how I can connect to my ancestors. We did a great episode with Tracy Stanley where she really dug into that, and I got to chat a little bit more about that. So head on over to that episode. We also did a great episode about land acknowledgements, and that taught me a lot. And you'll hear in that episode that I've made some pretty big mistakes as a podcast host. So I'll link to both of those in the show notes. I'm a Canadian yoga teacher, a mom of 3, an entrepreneur, and someone who really wants to and thrives on asking lots of questions. And that's why it feels like the podcast is a good fit. I love that we can hang out together. Maybe you're out walking or you're cleaning or you are driving around, and we get to hang out and learn together. So this podcast was really made for you, the yoga teacher, because I get how it feels to step out into the world, leave your yoga teacher training, and really feel like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? How do I run this business? What do I need to know? What do I need to do? And how can I continue to learn about yoga and really show up and practice yoga? So that was the vision for this podcast over 7 years ago. I can't believe it's been 7 years. It's really something. It doesn't feel like that. So I wanted a place where yoga teachers could connect to other yoga teachers along with ideas and information. And that's how the podcast was born. And if you're a returning listener and you know all of that, thank you so much for being here. If there is someone who has listened to all 7 years of me talking, you deserve an award. So reach out to me. We'll make a t-shirt or something. I've listened to Shannon for 7 years. That's probably more than anybody's listened to me. All joking aside, I'm so grateful to those of you who listen to multiple episodes. It's really a complete honor, and the podcast exists because of you. Today's podcast also exists because of our sponsorship from OfferingTree. So they support yoga teachers and studios, and they also support this podcast. I use and love their software in my own business because everything's automated. Payments, Zoom links, everything. And also, they give our podcast listeners a special discount if you go to this link, offeringtree.com/Shannon. Last week, I also gave a call out to support the podcast. So we are looking at ways of taking away sponsorship, really putting it in your hands as the podcast listener if you want to support the podcast. Now, maybe you know of a great product that would be a really good fit. I'm very fussy about sponsors. Maybe you want to chat about a collaboration where I talk about your yoga teacher training or a retreat that you're doing and you'd like to talk about sponsorship. Or maybe you'd like to make a donation to the podcast. You may have noticed that last week I sort of awkwardly talked about this at the end of the episode, and this week I made a promise to myself to put it at the start. So on our website, you can find where we list the podcast. There's a button right there where you can support the podcast. You can make a donation of any amount. If you made a donation of $1, I would be thrilled. If you're like, yes, the podcast helps me, that really helps us. And possibly we can get to the point then where we don't need to put ads on the podcast. So if you want an ad-free podcast, make sure you support us. You can also support us by sharing this episode, telling other yoga teachers about us. We appreciate that so much. And you can leave us a review as well. The other way you can support the podcast kind of in a non-direct way is to support Pelvic Health Professionals. So this is the other hat I wear. And inside of that membership, we really have some amazing things going on. We have a yoga series that's coming up with Kathleen Pratt. We have other yoga series in there, the replays of those. We interview pelvic health experts from around the world. There's all kinds of learning in there, and it works sort of like Netflix. So there's a monthly payment that you can make, or you can sign up for the whole year. This is a great way to show support, and that in turn also supports the podcast. It supports the work that I do, which then I can keep creating podcast episodes for you. So if you want to dive in and do some yoga with us, have a listen to what Kathleen has to say about the yoga series that she'll be sharing with us very soon.
This is Kathleen Pratt, and I'm thrilled to be collaborating with Pelvic Health Professionals in the upcoming 6-week online series, Nourish Your Nervous System. Our nervous systems are taxed by multiple stressors in our personal lives, communities, and planet. Over time, chronic stress can hurt our mental and physical health and well-being. Nourish Your Nervous System is an experiential dive into mind-body practices that not only reduce stress but help restore balance in the nervous system. Throughout the program, I will be sharing the science behind why these practices work. Simple and gentle movement, breath work, and mindfulness practices have helped me and my clients find new and effective ways to reduce anxiety, pain, tension, insomnia, and other symptoms of excess stress. I invite you to join me in this journey starting March the 5th.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. I am really excited about this yoga series. My nervous system needs this right now. And so if you, dear listener, are feeling like the same thing, we begin live March 5th, 2024. But yes, there is an on-demand replay if you are listening to this and the live is over. Visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com and look for the yoga button and click on that to sign up. Or, like I said, you can sign up for Pelvic Health Professionals, the entire membership, and then this is included. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to do today is really do a check-in, both you and I at the same time. And I thought, let's share a breath together. I'll guide that in a moment. And then I thought, instead of me reading from a script, so this is what I often do. I have a kind of an outline written in front of me just so I stay on track and get all the points in. But today I wanted to do a check-in and just share from the heart how things are feeling right in this moment. So you get kind of an unedited version of how I'm feeling, which is a little bit vulnerable and terrifying for me, I have to be honest. So let's do this together. If you want to pause before I share how I'm feeling and you want to send me a recording or an email of how you're feeling, I would love to hear that, by the way. Okay, so let's find a comfortable place wherever you are at. Maybe that's sitting down or standing. And let's find an inhale here together. First, I'm going to relax my shoulders. I just realized I'm really holding some tension in my shoulders. So you can do the same if you want. Find an inhale here and an exhale. And And then find your regular breath. Pause for a moment and really check in and just ask yourself, how am I doing in this moment? So I'm going to pause, and I'm also going to ask myself the same thing. And then I'm going to try and share with you. Now, first of all, I have a cold this week, and it's really it's weighing me down. And there's also some real sadness, like heartbreak, that is weighing me down. Oh, that's interesting when I check in here, because I thought what was going to happen is that some anger that I've been feeling lately, I thought that was going to bubble up, but it's very fascinating to me that it is more of a heaviness, a sadness, and a bit of heartbreak. I feel like this also feels really good to have this moment to check in. I have my eyes closed and I'm just thinking, how am I feeling right now? And I'm actually feeling comfortable, even though I have this cold that is clinging on and dragging me down. I feel comfortable sharing with all of you because I feel like we've gotten this far. If you've listened to any amount of episodes with me, I feel like we've learned a lot together over the last 7 years. And that's really exciting to me. I know when I send out a newsletter, someone who's brand new to my email might feel like, where is this coming from? But to those of you who have been listening to the podcast over the last 7 years, who are out in the community teaching yoga, and you feel the many things that are going on around the world, I feel like you get it. And we don't always agree on everything, but we hold a lot of compassion and space for each other. Wow, I'm really taking some moments to pause here. So let me explain the heartbreak right now. I have been feeling like, what the heck am I doing as a podcast host for yoga teachers? And part of that heartbreak is that I look around at different yoga teachers and I'm seeing an incredible amount of silence right now. And this is especially around what's happening right now in Gaza. And I am not saying this to point fingers or shame anyone. I just want to share what that feels like for me right now as someone who wants to speak up. I talked about this in the peace episode, the bonus episode of why this is so important to me to speak up for peace. I want to be able to speak up against harm and oppression because I feel like that's part of yoga. And I had this idea that yoga teachers would all basically be on the same page with this. Now, I realize that there are people who do not feel safe to speak up or do not feel comfortable to do so. So I feel like this check-in right now is giving me a little more space around finding compassion for that. I also realized that even in this week, a few people, bigger name people, not even in the yoga world, just in the world, some yoga people have spoken up, and they've hit a little bit of backlash for either the words that they said or the length of time that it took for them to say something. And I've been sitting with that because I just think, just jump in somewhere. Let's do this together. We can speak up and make mistakes and be in community. So that's really nuanced for me right now. I think the other thing is a shout out to a friend of mine who's an activist who's been doing this work for a very long time. I don't think you'll mind me calling you out on the podcast here, Jivana. So Jivana is coming on as a guest really soon on the podcast. He's been on the podcast a lot before. And I told him how heavy this week was feeling. And he said to me, is this the first time you've felt this way about humanity? Because Jivana has done a lot of work, activism work. He was really speaking up during the AIDS epidemic. And he said that he felt like the world was living in two realities. There was the reality that he was living in when he was speaking up. He's written about this in his book of how he had friends and loved ones dying and really got into activism at that point. And then he said, there were people who were not talking about it at all. And so I really sat with that and I was thinking, I think this is the first time where I ever feel like there aren't as many people speaking up. And I had expectations of more people speaking up, especially in health and wellness spaces. So there have been times where I've been really angry, so angry, thinking like, what are you doing, advertising a yoga teacher training or a retreat or whatever, and saying nothing about a massive amount of harm that like our North American and European governments are financially funding and supporting with our tax money. So I just got so angry thinking like, if someone is hosting a retreat and they haven't talked to their local representative, even if you have talked to your local representative, the same thing is happening. Part of your tax money is funding this. And what really gets me is the harm to children. It gets me somewhere in my heart that I just cannot explain. I'm a mom. I just think kids and children have so much potential in this world. And when we put them in situations of extreme violence and harm, it just feels so unfair to me. So when I say we put them in that situation, you might be thinking, well, I'm not, and I can't do anything about it. Well, I think the thing that we can do is talk to our local representatives. And if you haven't done that, try it. Someone was shocked the other day that like I've talked to my representative personally, like in 1 hour Zoom calls. And someone was like, I don't think I can get that time with my local rep. Well, I would try. I just called the office and booked an appointment. And someone said like, well, that must be different because you live in Canada. Try it. I don't know what it is like all over the world, but I got in fairly quickly. Did it matter? Did it make a difference? I submitted some questions to be asked. There are questions being asked right now about what kind of taxpayer money is going to supply weapons right now. And I think it can make a difference. So there are so many things that you can do. And I feel like I'm at this point of like, I'm not giving up. I'm just fed up. I'm just really angry. And I feel like I have every right to be angry and dysregulated. And I also feel like people might think, well, Shannon, this is why you have a cold, or like, this is why you can't sleep. And if you just like shut the news off and focus on positive things. And that right there makes me more angry than ever. Because that's not the answer. That's not going to change things for the kids in Gaza. It is action that is going to change things for them. And I can't sleep at night without being part of that action. That's why we're still talking about it here on the podcast. Now, one thing that has made all the difference is when I turn away from like the silence that I'm seeing or like the hateful messages that are full of misinformation. When I turn to look at the yoga teachers that are risking so much to speak up right now and that are taking their actual dollars from their yoga classes and donating it and just like endlessly, like it just seems like this amazing energy of speaking up, getting informed, attending events, holding events, supporting each other. I'm blown away by the community that is just like, no, this is the way it is. Sometimes I'm so inspired. I just think I hit this low moment and then I look over and someone is like, 100%, I know where I'm going. We're in this together. The other thing that has surprisingly been very comforting is like having a conversation with my good friend Ray about anger, like where I was like, okay, I'm going to just let it rip here in a voice message and just sharing like how upset and angry I was. And Ray did the same thing back in a message. And I was amazed at how hearing their anger in that message brought me comfort. And we talked about like how sometimes like in society, we are not taught to get comfortable with anger. Like we're taught, hey, especially women, in society are taught like, no, just smile and like think positive things or just like take a breath. So I guess a few calls to action. If you are feeling like you're being silent for a very good reason and I'm missing it, I would love to hear from you. And I mean it, no shame. I want to understand and I want to see how we can, as a collective, be speaking up more so that no one person is taking the brunt of it. And also, can you hold space for someone right now who's angry? And that might be in a one-on-one conversation, but that may also be when you see someone who's very angry right now online. You know, in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, we were taught to hold space for Black people and people of color because there was a lot of very justified anger. And I remember feeling uncomfortable with it. And I remember having some chats with white friends about how it was more difficult to learn from someone who was dealing with a lot of anger, emotion, really justified anger. So, the other thing that I want to share is if you are feeling this anger, one thing that helped me, and a shout out to Ray again for like this idea, was I went out on my walk and like threw snowballs. You know, it could be rocks, like in a safe way. I didn't throw them at anyone. I was just out there by myself. And it felt so good to like do something like that. So something physical where you're like moving your arms, or maybe a run makes you feel good. For me, that just makes me feel like, playing with the puppy now makes me feel good. But in general, running does not ease my system. So that's where I'm at. And honestly, I have thought more than ever about quitting the podcast for this reason. I have thought, is this what people even want to hear about? You know, maybe people want to hear about what yoga mat is the best, or what insurance company to use, which these are important things. These are important questions, or like how to sequence your class, or pick the right music, or make more money as a yoga teacher. And that's where that heartbreak comes in, because I feel like I can't sit here and show up for those conversations. I cannot ignore what's happening right now in Gaza and in other parts of the world, but right now my focus is in Gaza. I cannot ignore those things and just, create content that is sort of like sticking my head in the sand. So that's the heartbreak, is if enough connected yoga teacher listeners are here for the learning and the tough conversations, I'm here for it. If it's like, no, we really want to skip this, then I am not the person to be podcasting to that audience. Does that make sense? That's heartbreaking. Like I wouldn't have expected that. And I want to also say, as someone who's been podcasting, someone was asking me questions about how to start a podcast recently. And we got into this conversation of like politics and podcasting. And I realized very quickly that over the last 7 years, I have really made it my goal to listen and understand and to continue to learn. And more listening than talking often has served me so well. And it's made me feel like I want to be more and more, the word is not careful, more and more intentional with my language and what we're putting out there with the podcast. I'm just taking a big breath because that feels like, yes, it is the intention of it. And yeah, so I'm following what the yoga world wants right now. If you're feeling like, I fully support this, I want to get behind this, I want the podcast to keep going in this direction where we're here for like the tough conversations, I would say like, come and support the podcast. Head on over to our website, look under podcasts, look at support the podcast, leave a donation if you can, or tell someone else about it, or reach out and let me know how you're feeling about this. And as always, I want to learn and understand. If you disagree with me, I am here for it. I am listening. So leave me a message, send me a message in some way, and tell me if you feel like I'm missing something. Or tell me about your anger and your heartbreak and your, all of the things that are going on with you. Okay, I want to get into two messages that really have held me, have kept me steady. I was very nervous about putting a podcast out with Rula. I had no reason to be nervous other than I knew, people might be saying to me, why are you sharing this political stuff on a yoga podcast? But it very much is yoga. If you haven't heard the episode with Rula yet, go and have a listen to it. I'll link to it in the show notes. Thank you so much, Emily Baker, who shared a comment with Rula. I then asked Rula if I would be able to share it on the podcast. So thank you so much, Emily, for saying yes to that. Here's the message that was sent to Rula after that episode. Dear Rula, this morning I listened to your conversation with Shannon, and I thank you for your way of sharing. I'm not a yoga teacher, but I practice yoga. And I was drawn to the podcast because of the language used and the approach to the conversation. As was discussed in your conversation, there is an exhaustion that arises that can be insurmountable. A lot of my community are at this stage now, but I think it's because we still approach things in a clenching, institutionalized way. I've been trying to find ways to bring a much needed softness, and your description of ahimsa has shown me a way. A softness that can allow the heart to be strong enough to take action, rather than clenched in inaction. I'm deeply sorry for the pain and grief you are experiencing at this time. Please know that what you share makes others strong enough to hold you and all the Palestinians that deserve ahimsa now and always. Thank you. Oh my gosh, Emily, this is one of the most beautiful messages. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to that episode and then to share a message with Rula and then to give permission for me to read it on the podcast. This is one of the greatest gifts of podcasting. It really is. And it's messages like these that I'm just like, yep, I know exactly the direction we're going. We're going in that direction. That is full of compassion and wisdom and grace. And just thank you for summarizing this so beautifully. Okay, before I go on to the next feedback that I got after that episode with Rula, I want to tell you about an offering that Jivana Heyman is doing in collaboration with OfferingTree. So it's called Chair Yoga is Real Yoga. It's free for anyone to attend. So if you haven't met Jivana, he's the founder of Accessible Yoga, and he is going to talk to you about how you can make your yoga classes more accessible for all students by learning a little bit of chair yoga. So if you've ever been in that moment where as a yoga teacher, someone comes in and in that day, they need the support of a chair, whether that's standing or sitting, this is a great workshop to attend. So it's happening live Thursday, February 29th. If you head on over to OfferingTree or you get on their email list, you will hear about this workshop. And then also, if you are an OfferingTree user, like if you've signed up as an OfferingTree user, you get access to all of these recordings. I believe so. Ask the team over at OfferingTree how you can get it if you've missed the live version of this. And if you want to check out the software because you need a way to host a website or do bookings or all of the things that you need to do to run your yoga business, make sure to use our discount code that's over at offeringtree.com/Shannon. And also, I would get on their mailing list because OfferingTree does free workshops all the time with amazing yoga teachers or business professionals. So it's a great way to learn for free and get access to the replay. All right, let's get back into today's episode where I'm at this point where I'm like, I am celebrating a little bit more this 7 years of podcasting. I'm reading some messages that I got after we did our episode with Rula. Again, I'll link to that episode in our show notes. Okay, so this is another message that I got, and I'm sharing it with permission as well. So a yoga teacher who actually has a small community class, and we had talked about, as friends, I had shared like how I was feeling about things that are happening in Gaza. And I talked about how I was going to start to bring that onto the podcast. And I remember hearing a little bit of hesitancy from this yoga teacher, basically like around saying, how would I ever bring this into a yoga class because my students are dealing with so much in their lives? And I was like, that's a really good point. Okay, so here is what then this yoga teacher messaged to me. Hi, Shannon. After listening to your podcast this week, I can finally start to put a plan together to help dealing with difficult times into my yoga teachings. It has been difficult because I have students that are carrying some very heavy weight already. Your guest this week, so this was the episode with Rula again, got me right off the top by having that moment of silence. That was such a simple action, but powerful, a place to start. Yesterday, I had gotten out my collection of material on the sutras and felt a need to revisit it with my students. Today in the podcast, your guest confirmed to me that that is where I will start. My students with heavy weight can apply it to their own situation, and when feeling stronger, can expand elsewhere. Oh my gosh, I love this so much. I just want to say, like, this moment right here, reading this message, I was like, yes. Like, if we are feeling like we have the weight of the world on us for whatever reason right now, and we have stuff going on, we have to focus on that first before we can have the capacity to do many things. Okay, so the message goes on to say, thank you for recognizing some of us are overwhelmed, not knowledgeable, or disconnected in many ways from other parts of the world. Because of that not knowing, what to do can look like not caring or being selfish. Judgment or losing respect for these people is not going to serve any good. I personally don't have anyone in my life with a family connection to Gaza. Only my dear friend who has lived there with his family as peacekeepers. And I kind of knew this story. This yoga teacher and I had talked about this story about this friend. So I sort of knew this a little bit in case you're like, wait, where did this come from, this part of the message? So only my dear friend who lived there with his family as peacekeepers. I was so disturbed by his tears and emotional pain, I didn't know what to say. I think I'm ready to have a conversation with him. Most of us don't know how to bring this into our teachings. Any ways of doing this are welcome. Oh my gosh, this message made the difference. I remember it was at the end of a long day. We had gotten some messages of really harm and hate, and not very many. The majority of messages were really positive, but you know what? Those ones stick out. And so at the end of the day, I was like, oh, thank you. This made a really huge difference. And knowing that then this yoga teacher was going to bring that into their community in a really small way, hold space, have a moment of silence, really lean on the sutras for how we can help ourselves with all the weight of what's going on in our lives, not just what's going on globally. And then to know that this yoga teacher then felt like she could have a conversation with a really good friend who had connections to Gaza, it's amazing. So those are two messages that made a huge impact with me in the last month. And there have been many other messages. So I am just so grateful when I see a comment on a post that we've made or a podcast that we've done or a message in support of the work that we're doing here on the podcast. It means more than I can even convey, especially when things have been really heavy and really tough. It's felt really tough to keep going as a podcaster right now. For me, personally. I don't know how other people are doing as podcasters, but that's how it's felt for me. There's one other piece in this message that I just want to call attention to. I had shared this in an Instagram story and someone was saying to me, can you make this shareable? I had been talking and I thought, you know what? Why don't I try and bring this onto the podcast? So again, this is not scripted, but I had sort of reached out on Instagram and said, what if, you as a podcast listener listening to this right now, or someone who's in our Facebook group for connected yoga teachers, or someone who gets my emails, or someone who watches my Instagram stories and gets to know me through my winter walks and my gardening time. So someone who has like connected with me in some way. What if I reached out to you and I said, I'm in so much pain right now because where I live, it's not safe. Weapons from your country are attacking my people to the point where I can't go to the hospital. I can't get any food. I can't get clean water. I'm living in a tent and it's cold and it's rainy and my children are not safe and I don't have formula for them. And I'm being pushed out of my land. I can no longer do the farming and the growing that I've done. And I'm worried about my safety. What would your reaction to me be in that moment? If I, like who I am right now, if I told you that and we've connected in the past. And then I asked a further question of like, would that change how you are showing up when you go to market the next yoga offering that you're putting out there? Would you completely stay silent about what's happening to me if we're friends or you're connected to me in some way and you're concerned about my safety and my well-being? Or would you just ignore what I just said and go about your life like nothing was happening? Just go about your day and sell your programs and your workshops. Because I think one thing that has happened, like this last message said, is they didn't really have connections with Palestinians, with people in Gaza, with people in the West Bank or Jerusalem. But their friend did, and their friend was in so much pain over it. That brought it a little bit closer to them. And because they listened to the podcast, that brought it even closer again. I think in these connections, we realize how connected we really are. And for me, when I'm speaking up right now about the harm, I just feel like these are people that we've gotten to know. We're part of their lives now. And even if we don't know them that well, I would never want this to happen to anyone on the planet. And so I think there's a way, it's tricky. I'll tell you, it's tricky. I am marketing a yoga series right now that I know is going to be so helpful. And at the same time, I'm still speaking up for the people of Palestine. And I also want to say those are the people I want to support. So if you're looking around at what yoga offering to take or what yoga teacher training to take or what retreat or workshop to sign up for or online class, please check in. Is this someone who is speaking up against harm right now? Honestly, that's how you can sort of make your vote. And that's what I'm looking at doing. And if you want to do that, one way that you can do that is you can sign up for some of our yoga offerings. We have a 6-week series coming up that's all about nourishing your nervous system with Kathleen Pratt. I'm so excited about this series. It starts March the 5th, and there is a replay available. It's a 6-week online yoga series. Kathleen is going to cover yoga, but also mindfulness and also current research about the nervous system and how we can really work to nourish the nervous system. You don't need to have done yoga before. So yes, invite your stressed out friends who are like at their limit right now or people who want to have less stress in their life. So you can sign up for that on its own, or you can sign up for that as part of our Pelvic Health Professionals membership. The next call that we're doing inside of that membership is we're talking with Mary Redinger about how we can create a thriving one-on-one yoga business. So yes, we are still covering other topics here on the podcast, and I'm trying to figure out how we can do that, how we can still answer your questions and at the same time speak up against oppression and harm. So here's what it sounds like. It sounds, sometimes a little weird to like market something, but these are things that are helping yoga teachers who have questions, and we still really want to support you with the things that you need to keep going as a business owner. So to check out all of that stuff, that's over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. And if right now in this moment you're like, you know what, I can't sign up for that yoga series for whatever reason, or I can't join the membership, feel free to share it with other people who might be interested. Maybe you can share it on social media or in an email. We would love that. Again, it's pelvichealthprofessionals.com. Next week on the podcast, I am sharing a conversation that I had a long while back with my good friend Jivana Heyman because he has a new book out. This is book number 3, and we're going to talk about how to teach accessible yoga. I cannot wait until you hear this conversation. And I love having conversations with Jivana on the podcast because we chat outside of podcast world, and I feel like it makes it a really nice kind of back and forth conversation between friends. So I'm excited to share that with you. And we are not just talking about how to make like a pose more accessible. We are talking about finances right off the top of that episode. So make sure you subscribe to the podcast if you're not already, and tune in next week. Huge thank you to our whole team over here who makes the podcast possible. You know, we haven't been a team for the last entire 7 years, but we've been a team for a really long time. Suzanne, Crunch, and Sinead, I hope today that you are like, as you listen to this audio, because they all listen to this audio at some point, as you listen to this audio, I hope that you are so aware of my gratitude and the community's gratitude for the work that you do in this world. Also, thank you, dear listener. Oh my gosh, thank you. I would have never imagined when I started this podcast that I would still be going 7 years in, and it is because of you that is even possible. When you share the podcast, you tell other yoga teachers about it, you send us a message and you tell us the impact it's making. That is like our fuel. When you send us your questions, that is also what keeps us going. So thank you so much. Thank you also for being here all the way to the end. And I have a question that I've been asking for a long time. Have I been asking this for 7 years? I don't even know when I started asking this question, but here it is. What will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community, so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?